From the beginning, the Rock River was the catalyst, the focus, the reason for settlers, merchants, and traders to cluster along its banks in southern Wisconsin. Noted for its water power potential and as an avenue of transportation, the Rock enticed Henry Janes to file claim in 1836 on a small tract of land on the river's east bank. His half-section of land was located about a mile upstream from the city's original settlement opposite the Big Rock. A crude frame house, 18 feet square, was erected by Janes near what is now the hub of the city, named after him. Henry Janes, who made the only successful plat of Janesville, was also a commercial entrepreneur, operating a ferry service across the river and a combination inn, tavern, and post office in his cabin. Janes applied for and was granted a post office which the U.S. Postmaster General designated Janesville. Today, the Lappin Hayes block stands near the approximate same site of the Janes cabin at the intersection of Main and Milwaukee Streets. After a century and a half, the four-story block building at 2 South Main Street, built by Thomas Lappin, remains as one of the most imposing of the Italianate commercial buildings in Janesville. In 1842, only 6 years after Janes constructed his cabin, Lappin had erected a functional, but hardly stylish, 2-story frame general store on the site. 13 years later, with the advent of a brickyard and stone quarry in the city, Lappin tore down the frame building and constructed this 4-story cream brick office and retail block.
The details of the Lappin Hayes block are typical of the Italianate blocks built in Janesville between 1855 and 1870. Each floor has differing decorated windows. 4th floor windows are rounded with arched hoods. Above these hoods are brick reveals. The hoods and reveals give the impression of arcaded windows. The 2nd and 3rd floor windows are decorated with cornice hood moldings and brackets.
A public hall seating 1,800 occupied the upper story. Until 1870, when the Myers Opera House was opened, Lappin's Hall was the center of the city's cultural and social life. In 1899, the building was purchased by Dennis and Michael Hayes, Janesville contractors. Their remodeling included the installation of Janesville's first elevator and the construction of a new central light well.
Exterior additions to the building included a 3-story Queen Anne-style pressed metal bay with embossed detailing to accent the Main and Milwaukee Street appearance. Another bay was also added at the northwest corner and was similarly decorated. A cast-iron classical cornice with modillions is featured at the top of the building on the street facades, also an 1899 addition.
Over the next 70 years, the building, now painted red, housed the offices of many prominent professionals. In 1974, the upper floors were closed. In 1976, the block was listed in the National Register of Historic Places. In 1983, the federal tax credit program available to owners of National Register eligible buildings was used in its rehabilitation. According to the National Register nomination prepared for the South Main Street Historic District in 1988, the Lappin Hayes block stands today not only as the only intact remnant of the 4 blocks that once anchored the corner of Main and Milwaukee Streets in Janesville, but as a fine example of renovation and adaptive reuse of a commercial structure. The first-floor storefronts have been remodeled in a manner that meets modern building codes while providing a sense of its historic past. A brass plaque commemorating the Henry James frame home site adorns the Milwaukee Street entrance to the building. At 12, 14, and 16 South Main Street, one finds the Bennett and Clapp block, one of the earliest commercial buildings that still survives intact. Ensign H. Bennett and New Yorker J. F. Clapp erected this Greek Revival block in 1851 for $12,000. Early tenants were Bennett and Bostwick's dry goods store, Tallman and Collins drugstore, and the Empire Cash Store. The R.M. Bostwick Clothing Store, one of Janesville's most prestigious tailoring and clothing stores, remained in operation at that location for nearly 100 years.
Constructed of red brick, the building has regular fenestration in the Greek Revival style on both the second and third floors. The windows are individually topped with stone lintels, which have a very slight corniced effect and sit on stone sills.
Probably the most altered building in Janesville's downtown is the former Bostwick's department store at 20 South Main Street. Bostwick's department store was a large, locally owned business which, because of its size and reputation for fine quality goods, drew considerable numbers of shoppers to Janesville's downtown. Originally constructed around 1875, it remained intact until the 1980s, when it was remodeled into a mini-mall.
In the late 1980s, a developer turned it into a professional building, including a postal station. The renovation effort has returned the historic facade, which features 7 building-high pilasters. Next door at 30 South Main Street is a small 2-story red brick commercial building with 3 arched windows on the second floor. The building's most prominent feature is its painted cornice. The building has recently undergone extensive renovation at the street level, and the embossed tin ceiling inside has been preserved. This classical revival-inspired building at 32 South Main was constructed around 1905. While its 2-story pressed metal oriels resemble the Queen Anne style, they feature formal classical revival details and represent the changes commercial architecture was going through in the early 20th century. The building is topped with a parapet roof, under which is a cornice with brackets and dentils.
The building opened as a restaurant and was part of the J.C. Penney store, which took up many South Main Street storefronts from 1923 till 1974. This majestic building at 38 South Main occupies the site of the American House Stagecoach Hotel that burned in 1867. In an unusual but practical combination, the building, erected here in 1868, was designed to accommodate both the Court Street Methodist Church and, at the ground floor, commercial tenants, notably grocers. Upstairs, an elegant 2-story sanctuary, offices, and classrooms served the members of the Court Street Methodist congregation. The building was used by the congregation until 1905, when it was sold to the Masonic Western Star Lodge, which occupied it until 1965. From 1920 to 1974, the J.C. Penney department store was a tenant on the first floor. At present, an appliance retailer occupies the first floor.
The details of the upper floors remain largely intact. The distinctive mansard roof and the prominent central entry pavilion are hallmarks of the Second Ampere style.
A high school, erected in 1859, and an 1867 courthouse were the only 2 other non-residential examples in Janesville of the Second Ampere style. Both have since been demolished.
The mansard is supported by an elaborate cornice of fancy scrolled brackets and full pediments over the entry pavilions. A belt course of brick corbels sits under this ornate cornice. The second and third floor windows have heavy, round stone arches with blocks as stops. The stone trim continues down the windows as surrounds, ending in stone sills with corbel stops. The Court Street elevation still shows evidence of the original sidewalk-level arched windows. A quick peek at the rear of all the buildings along the first block of South Main Street reveals a continuity of style of the buildings with their front facades. At the intersection of South Main and East Court Street stands the Kent Block, constructed in 1895. A round tower, projecting bays, elaborate cornices, along with a varied roof line with a parapet, typifies the Queen Anne architectural style. The roof of the oriel is domed and reaches a full story higher than the top of the building. A pressed metal cornice runs along the east and north walls of the building and features modillions, dentils, and brackets. A brick frieze runs under the cornice on the east and north walls of the building. The Kent Block, as identified on the parapet of the main elevation, is more detailed and makes better use of the elements of the Queen Anne style than any other building in Janesville's downtown. In its early years, the block housed a variety of grocery stores and the Janesville Floral Company. The original corner entrance to the main store is intact with large show windows. The upper story apartments of the Kent Block were known as the La Vista Flats. The Kent Block is attached to its companion apartment building on Court Street by walkways with metal railings. This block is more restrained in its detail, but mirrors the main block, especially in the bays. Reportedly, this building was added later, sometime around 1900. The Janesville Floral Company erected this 20th century commercial style building at 54 South Main Street around 1915. Typical of the style, its streamlined details include a 2-story wide concrete fascia with the company name inscribed. The Schaller Block at 58 South Main Street is a 2-story brown brick building that features an arched parapet roof, 2nd-story oriel bay window, square block decorations, and 2 narrow windows flanking the bay. The Woods Thorn Block next door also has a parapet roof with battlements decorated with modernistic modillions. It also features a 2nd-floor oriel. It was constructed as a medical building, which included doctors, eye doctors, and dentists.
Janesville's former public library building is significant as an example of a large-scale formo-classical revival design. The building, constructed in 1902 with the assistance of a $30,000 Carnegie grant, included a 2nd-story auditorium which originally housed the Apollo Club. From 1932 to 1982, it was the home of the Janesville Little Theater, the oldest self-supporting, continuously operating theater group in Wisconsin. The library now serves as the Janesville Senior Citizen Center.
The building is constructed of gray brick trimmed with Bedford limestone. A portico supported by colossal Ionic columns marks the center of the main elevation. The pediment above is decorated with carved stone ornament and a date stone. Carved festoons alternate with segments of the building name across the frieze. Against the building wall, an applied wood cornice creates a plain parapet above the roofline. A wooden starburst balustrade spans the colonnade. Keystoned stone arches decorate the recessed entrances, and brick moldings with wide stone panels and raised letters decorate other openings. A wide flight of concrete stairs provides a formal approach to the building. The rear of the building is divided into 3 sections with a wooden pediment crowning the multi-windowed center portion.
Brooklyn-born architect J.T.W. Jennings designed this building during his term as supervising architect of the University of Wisconsin Buildings and Grounds. In 1923, this majestic building at 408 South Main was erected as Janesville's 3rd high school.
The exterior of red brick with Bedford limestone trim was modestly decorated in the popular collegiate Gothic style. Gargoyles guard the exterior of the building, which was closed as a middle school in 1997. It was refurbished into a 44-unit apartment building with much of its lavish interior woodwork, terrazzo floors, and marble fountains still intact. The Fredendall block at 33 through 39 South Main Street is a striking example of the Italianate style here executed in cream brick. The heavy brick corbelled hood moldings over the regularly placed windows and the deep corbels at the cornice provide a rich surface of light and dark. Windows over the stairwells are accentuated with brick pilasters flanking these openings and with a panel of diamond-patterned brickwork.
A fire in 1869 destroyed the earlier buildings on this site, and John Fredendall and Hiram Baker each erected half of the block which now bears Fredendall's name. A great variety of businesses have occupied this large block, including harness makers, grocery stores, meat markets, a bike shop, a bakery, and clothing stores. The building has also provided apartments and housed the Ryan Funeral Home. In 1970, a fire gutted the upper stories. Owner Bob Kimball has sensitively restored the building, which now is occupied by retail businesses and offices.
The original cast-iron Corinthian pilasters accent and separate the storefronts. They are marked RRIW 1869, indicating they were manufactured by the Rock River Iron Works.
The Helms and McVicker blocks were built in 1905 and originally housed the Helms Seed Store at 29 South Main and the McVicker Brothers Plumbing Firm at 31 South Main Street. In the 1920s, a popular cafe operated in the Helms block, while the plumbing business remained in its original location until the 1950s.
The details of these buildings are quite typical of turn-of-the-century commercial construction in Janesville. The Queen Anne-style buildings are topped with bracketed metal cornices stamped with the owner's names. Windows at the upper floors are set into pressed metal bays that are decorated with modillions and panels. The storefront of the McVicker building still retains its original pressed metal ornamentation at the front entrance, one of such few remnants in the city at the street level.
Robert Hodge and Herman Buchholz formed a partnership to manufacture carriages in 1863. In 1880, they constructed this three-story brown brick Italianate building for the purpose of manufacturing and selling their line, which eventually included omnibuses, buggies, phaetons, carryalls, sleighs, and circus wagons. In the 1880s, the business was renamed the Janesville Carriage Company, foreshadowing the industrial future of the city. In 1919, as carriage manufacturing gave way to horseless carriages, the firm sold out to Sampson Tractor, a branch of the General Motors Corporation. Between 1923 and 1936, the building was the home of the Bower City Implement Company, a manufacturer of agricultural equipment.
The building features a recently re-bricked corner entrance, which now conforms more to the original look of the building. The south side of the building is topped with a metal bracketed classical cornice. A connecting three-story matching addition on North Parker Drive was built around 1900.
Across Parker Drive from the Janesville Carriage Company is the London Hotel, also with a corner entrance. It was built by Fred Jones, who bought the lot in 1887 and took out a $6,000 mortgage in 1892 to construct the building, which opened in 1893. Over a century later, the structure, although no longer used as a hotel, is still in use as a commercial building.
The Queen Anne architectural style includes a round tower, projecting bays, elaborate cornices, and a varied roof line composed of spires, parapets, and chimneys. The red brick building to the rear was added later and is connected to the London Hotel at the second and third floors.
The Peters Block at 113 East Milwaukee, presently a 4-story structure, also had its origins as a hotel. The first 2 stories were constructed in 1849, and 3 additional stories were added in 1855. The present appearance dates from 1913, and the decoration is based on brick and glazed brick geometric motifs associated with a 20th century commercial style. In the 20th century, the building has been used for office and retail purposes.
Tall piers with geometric capitals alternate between triple windows and diamond-patterned spandrels. An ornamental brick frieze appears across the top. Although extensively remodeled, the rear of the building still shows evidence of the original brick rounded door sashes and window frames.
The Ryan Building at 109 and 111 East Milwaukee was built as the Merchants Hotel in the early 1850s. It was later renamed the Ogden House.
The cream brick front was remodeled about 1892 with 2 stylish metal-clad bays. Later, the cornice was removed and the brick continued flush to the roof. Part of the original fenestration appears on the center of the facade.
A disastrous fire in December of 1865 destroyed a number of buildings on North Main Street, as well as those several blocks to the east.
The block was rebuilt between 1866 and 1868, and the rebuilding resulted in this excellent example of post-Civil War commercial architecture. This building is still one of Janesville's best remaining Victorian commercial blocks, important as a good example of Italianate style. Although erected for 3 owners, the cream brick sections were built in a unified manner, with round arched windows and identical deep bracketed cornices. At the ground level, cast iron pilasters with foliated capitals serve both decorative and structural purposes. The cast iron pilasters, still partially visible, are stamped RRIW for the Rock River Iron Works.
18 North Main was first used as a saloon and then a grocery. Today, it is the site of a popular Janesville tavern. 20 North Main has housed a hardware store, a plumbing business, a shooting gallery, and later a saloon.
A 3-sided metal-clad bay, decorated with swags, was added probably around the turn of the century. 22 North Main is of particular note for its brick arches topped by keystones above the upper story windows and ornamental brickwork under the 3rd-story windows, and a dogtooth frieze partially visible under the 2nd-story windows.
22 and 24 North Main has been occupied by the Wisconsin Lodge No. 14 of the International Order of Oddfellows, IOOF, since 1866. East Wall Street, between North Main Street and North Parker Drive, is one of the few streets in Janesville faced with early 20th century red paving brick. Brick pavement was first tried in Janesville around 1900 on West Milwaukee Street, followed by Main and East Milwaukee Streets. Other streets have had the brick covered by a number of coats of asphalt or other paving materials. It's difficult to present the history of downtown Janesville without recognizing one of the city's preeminent builders. Peter Myers arrived in Janesville in 1845 and 45 years later was praised for the construction of more and finer buildings than any other man in Rock County. Yet his largest and most famous buildings have all been destroyed. Of note were the Myers Opera House, the Myers Hotel, the Myers Armory Block, and his impressive Milwaukee Street residence. However, 2 of his buildings remain intact.
The house at 121 North Parker Drive is significant architecturally as one of Janesville's oldest and best preserved brick buildings constructed in the simplified Greek Revival style. The house was built of local vermilion brick over limestone foundation. The house was extended 18 feet to the rear, probably soon after construction, and in spite of a visible seam, the brick is a close match, as are the stone windows and sills and the foundation. Presumably, the entrance was originally recessed under a flat stone lintel, but is now topped by a low, segmented brick arch, and the door is flush with the entrance. Known today as the Century Building, it was adapted to office space by the law firm which presently owns the building.
This two-story complex of cream brick in the Italianate style contained the pork packing business established and operated by Peter Myers about 1851. Myers was born in France and learned the trade of a butcher in the United States as a young man. His first Janesville business was a meat market, but he soon turned to pork packing. He acquired considerable wealth at this enterprise, which enabled him to build the other aforementioned commercial buildings. Myers was also an investor in a number of early firms in the city, including the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, the Rock County National Bank, 2 railroads, and the Janesville Cotton Mills.
The building at 119 and 121 North Main Street has little decoration, while 123 North Main Street, which originally housed the plant office, has more elaborate brickwork, including brick arches and a brick corbelled cornice, well laid in a varied pattern. The cornerstone details the date of construction and identifies Myers as the owner.
By 1870, the first floor of the block was subdivided. The pork packing plant continued in operation, but a gas steam fitter's shop occupied the storefront of 119 North Main Street.
Inside, the red brick party wall is still in evidence. The Willard Coleman building, constructed around 1860 at 117 North Main, is a 2-story block with red brick walls extending down to the sidewalk level. It has a cast iron front with rosettes decorating a flat metal beam. The second story has a wood bay added after the turn of the century, decorated with palmetto friezes. There is a simple band of decorative brickwork at the cornice. Of note are the artistic renderings on the south side of the building, simulating Queen Anne-style bays.
This narrow Greek Revival building with its pair of tall windows is among the oldest to survive in downtown Janesville. A jeweler named Horn was the builder in 1855.
The window treatment at the second story is notable for the characteristic use of simple stone sills and lintels. Locally manufactured cast iron columns are exposed at the entry.
As if in celebration of the city's prosperity during the mid and late 19th century, a parade of stylistic commercial buildings marched down North Main Street. These new buildings, nearly all constructed of brick and stone, reflected the architectural trends of the day. These buildings are mid-19th and turn of the 20th century, small-scale commercial structures with characteristic second-story bays.
Alan Bates erected this building at 15 North Main Street, about a decade after his adjoining building at 13 North Main. It retains many of its original Italianate details, including round arched second-story windows and cast iron columns and pilasters manufactured at the Rock River Iron Works.
Bates rented the first floor to the proprietor of a dry goods store and maintained his law office on the second floor. Allen Cole Bates was a native of Sackett's Harbor, New York. He arrived in Janesville at the age of 21 and practiced law here for 70 years. He built 13 business blocks and owned a fine residence in Janesville. Allen Bates constructed this building at 13 North Main Street in 1853. About 1900, the building was completely remodeled and covered with limestone. At the time of its remodeling, it was operated as a billiard hall. It has a pressed metal bay at the second story dating from the remodeling and 2 cast iron columns from the original design. The appearance of this handsome red brick building at 11 North Main, built in the late 1860s, has been virtually unaltered above the ground floor since the 1880s. Various owners and tenants have included druggists, grocers, and tobacco and wine and liquor dealers. Originally, Meyer's merchandise store was located at the ground level, and 2 upper stories housed a pharmacy. The Star Billiard Parlor occupied the building from 1911 to 1973.
Rounded arched window heads with soft limestone keystones and limestone string courses are distinctive features of the Italianate-style facade.
While the center of Janesville's commercial district was located on the eastern edge of the Rock River, commercial development soon began to extend west along West Milwaukee Street as part of a natural evolution of the downtown, and in order to serve the large number of people in the residential districts on the west side of the river. The construction of Janesville's first bridge, a toll bridge at the site of Henry James's Ferry, opened the way for West Bank development. By 1848, nearly 2/3 of the young settlement's residents lived west of the river. Eventually, the commercial area along West Milwaukee Street expanded into cross streets such as River and Franklin Streets. By the turn of the century, the west side of the river rivaled the east side in size and commercial strength. The first Milwaukee Street Bridge, constructed of wood and connecting commercial buildings, was destroyed by a major fire in 1913. A second, more disastrous fire on April 14, 1942, failed to damage the newer concrete bridge, but destruction to the commercial buildings, including Woolworths, still marks the fire as one of Janesville's worst. The Woolworth Company rebuilt on the site in 1946, and the new store reflected the Art Deco style of architecture.
In 1998, the building was refurbished as the Janesville Athletic Club Riverfront Center.
The Bennett Block stands at 29 and 31 West Milwaukee. Built in 1880 and remodeled extensively in 1920, and again in 1988, it is known now as the Carley Block. The building was the first location for the modern Janesville Library in 1883. Today, it houses the school district of Janesville's charter school. Several blocks down South River Street at 555 stands the former Janesville Pumping Station. It is historically significant because it represents the development of the water and sewer system in Janesville. The 1887 building originally consisted of an engine room, a boiler room, and a large smokestack. 4 other additions were incorporated by 1930. A devastating fire in 1988 threatened its ruin, but the architectural firm of Angus Young rescued the building and, without damage to the exterior, turned it into a modern office facility.
This group of architectural buildings on the first block of South River Street was constructed in the 19th century, but have 20th century storefronts. The Italianate and Queen Anne decorated building at 24 South River Street is a 2-story brick block with a metal cornice. Brick corbelling surrounds the second-story metal-clad oriel window. Next door at 22 South River Street stands the Frink Barrows building, constructed between 1867 and 1870. While it has a tall 3rd story, there is no decorative cornice to break up the brick wall. Dominating the center of this group of buildings, this double block at 18 and 20 South River, built in 1892, is constructed of brick and features an elaborate Queen Anne-style metal cornice. The cornice is accented with a gabled pediment in the middle that features a scalloped shingle decoration under which is embossed the name of the original owner.
During the early 20th century, the Burpee block housed a large grocery store, perhaps a forerunner of modern supermarkets. Between 1915 and 1919, this store was known as the Janesville Tea Company, and between 1923 and 1927, the Universal Grocery Company. The commercial block at 14 and 16 South River Street was originally built in the 1880s and remodeled in the early 20th century.
It is a two-story block which has a facing of 20th century brown tapestry brick veneer. The oriel is decorated with swags in recessed panels and is topped with a cornice accentuated with classical details. The former Kresge store at 101 and 103 West Milwaukee Street was built around 1930. The two-story block is built of tan brick with a distinctive dark mortar. A stone belt course separates the two stories, and a flat stone cornice runs across the length of the building. A panel of stylized diamonds in the Art Deco mode also runs around the second floor of the building. The Kresge name is still evident at the top center of the front facade. This red brick double storefront block at 105 and 107 West Milwaukee Street has a metal cornice and pressed metal bays, features characteristic of Queen Anne-style commercial architecture. The cornice is decorated with brackets and an embossed design. The oriels feature onion-shaped domes and embossed detail. Between the bays are a pair of narrow pilasters which rise to meet the pressed metal cornice. The storefront was recently remodeled with red brick.
Between 1890 and 1903, this was the location of the Edward Hall clothing store. The proprietor then joined with Albert Hubel to operate a furniture store here until 1919. Hubel then operated a clothing store until about 1936. John and Michael Jan's Meat Market operated here at 109 West Milwaukee from 1903 to 1911, followed by the Lowell Hardware Store, which remained until about 1927.
The storefront is a simple example of the classical revival style popular with Janesville builders after the turn of the century. Above the modernized ground floor, there is a pressed metal bay decorated with panels, modillions, and dentils. Constructed of red brick, the building features a metal cornice decorated with brackets. Original features of this three-story cream brick block, built in 1869, are the wooden cornice and segmental and rounded arched windows decorated with prominent keystones and flanked with shallow brick pilasters.
J.T. Durkee first ran his hardware business here at 111 West Milwaukee, and in 1871, George Hawes purchased the structure and operated a grocery store. During the 1880s, the building's upper floors housed a dance hall and apartments, as well as the studio of George W. Wise, a photographer.
These double storefront Italianate-style blocks at 113 to 125 West Milwaukee were likely executed by the same builder, although for different clients. The prominent arched parapets are distinctive features. On each building front, 3 segmentally arched windows flank single, tall, narrow, round-arched windows.
The double block at 113 West Milwaukee housed a number of specialty stores, including an early movie theater. Beginning in 1915, the building became a department store, first as the Max Meisel and Company department store, then in 1931 as the Amos Rayberg department store, a business which lasted until the 1960s. The 3 blocks built in 1869 were home to a great variety of enterprises over the past century. At 121, for example, a clothing store, Colvin's Baking Company, a restaurant, the Stearns and Baker's Philadelphia Drug Store, and the Badger Drug Company were all housed at various times. This YMCA building, built in 1926, replaced the first YMCA on West Milwaukee Street, which opened in 1895. The building received a major addition in 1969. Then, in 1999, the newly combined YMCA and Boys and Girls Club remodeled and doubled the size of the old facility to its current appearance.
The original 3-story brown brick section of the building displays details of the Mediterranean Revival style of architecture. The large multi-paned round arched windows of the old main facade, along with their wrought iron trim, are still existent.
Across the street at 210 Dodge is the old post office building, now housing a pharmacy and offices. The 1-story structure, erected in 1938, is a streamlined, modern building.
It has a raised main elevation that makes the building appear to be 2 stories in height.
The best-known tenant in this building at 209 West Milwaukee, built around 1865, was the Tarrant and Osgood grocery store, in business until around 1915. Later, the building housed the city fruit market.
The second floors of 211 and 213 West Milwaukee still show the relief brick design. The Curtis Building at 215 West Milwaukee Street has retained the second floor keystoned arched windows and is mirrored by 217, but with a lighter cream-colored brick. The 2-story commercial building at 219 West Milwaukee Street was constructed around 1870. Look up to see a central pair of round arched windows with a brick surround and a wooden cornice decorated with rosettes and elaborate brackets. These details have survived the remodelings apparent at the ground level. The 2-story cream brick block known as the Cannon Building at 221 and 223 West Milwaukee Street is comprised of 3 storefronts built in 1878. The ground floor remodeling dates from the mid-1950s, but the upper story shows evidence of both the date of construction and an early 1900 remodeling, when a metal classical cornice with brackets and modillions was added, along with pressed metal bays.
The Pember and Newsom Clinic, which eventually became the Riverview Clinic, began in Dr. Pember's old office in 1918. The storefront housed a drugstore until the early 1990s. This 2-story Georgian Revival brick building at 51 South Jackson presently houses Forward Janesville Incorporated. It was constructed around 1912 for the Rock County Telephone Company.
It features a decorative wooden cornice, brick pilasters, and a corner entrance with a gable overhang.
The handsome Gothic Revival Church, built by the Congregationalists at the corner of Jackson and Dodge Streets in 1875, replaced an earlier brick structure which was destroyed by fire. Its broad roof and bold steeple made it a focal point in the skyline of the growing city. It also features lancet windows and buttresses.
Thomas Mackin constructed this block in 1885. The heavy cornice with brackets and dentils and pairs of double-hung sashes decorated with heavy arches and keystones are fine details characteristic of the high Victorian Italianate style. The storefront at the ground level is still somewhat intact.
The Mackin family operated a saloon and retail liquor business at this location until about 1900. It was succeeded by the saloon owned by Joseph Hunt. The Merrill Building, 307 West Milwaukee, is also a late Italianate two-story red brick building with a large bracketed metal cornice. The commercial building at 315 was for years a barber shop. A narrow building, it exhibits a prominent Queen Anne bay. The Monterey Hotel was the last addition to this block of specialty stores. Several hotels have stood on this site. Although not visible, a portion of the 1880 Grand Hotel is incorporated into the present building. The Monterey, constructed in 1930, was Janesville's last major downtown hotel building, and it remains its most imposing. The six-story structure was designed in the modernistic Art Deco style, encompassing decorative features in curved and zigzagging patterns.
The ornate panels adorning the Monterey Hotel are composed of tan terracotta, which flows across the building's exterior and caps the tower and parapets of the building. The vertical profile of the tower is emphasized by the use of spandrels and rooftop terracotta ornamentation. Terracotta also clads the South High Street entrance of the building and reaches up to cover the second floor above the entrance as well. The first floor of the hotel is covered with stone veneer and accented with tile. Gold leaf is baked into the black terracotta details at the second floor.
In 1930, the Janesville Tank Company moved into the new Janesville Armory building across the street from the Monterey Hotel. The Tank Company heroically participated in the infamous Bataan Death March during the early years of World War II. The red and cream brick Mediterranean Revival building was designed by a military architect and was used by the Wisconsin National Guard until 1970. In 1977, it became home to the Rock County Historical Society, which vacated the building in 1999.
Built in 1870, the E.C. Smith block at 401 and 403 West Milwaukee has a brick corbelled cornice of dentils and brackets. Stepped pilasters accent the corners of the building. The round-arched second-story windows are decorated with brick surrounds and round brick arches.
A meat business that occupied this building for many years under several owners was known as the City Meat Shop. The classically influenced Casey block at 405 and 407 West Milwaukee Street was built in 1901. While they have identical details, the two sides of the building are not equal in size and are constructed of a different color brick and feature metal-clad bays. The 20th century commercial building at 409 West Milwaukee displays the original owner's name in the center relief and was erected in 1901 with a double storefront.
The building has a raised parapet accented with brick corbelling above the two bay windows. The Italianate-influenced Daly block at 413 West Milwaukee Street, built in 1881, is a two-story brick block with a large double cornice. The cornice features ornate end brackets, modillions, and dentils, and an embossed design. The three second-story windows are decorated with shouldered arches with keystones.
The Klein block at 415 and 417 West Milwaukee Street, although built in 1907, still expresses the Queen Anne style of architecture with window bays and decorative metal cornice.
The oldest building on the block is the G. Davis Building at 419 West Milwaukee Street, built in 1868. It has inset brickwork panels across the top of the building A row of brick corbelling runs underneath. Pilasters separate the three windows of each of the upper stories.
The 400 block of West Milwaukee generally marks the western edge of the historic commercial district. This group of buildings housed specialty stores, including saloons and groceries, in addition to the meat shop.
Constructed in 1893, this Queen Anne-style building on the northwest corner of West Milwaukee and High Streets was Janesville's first YMCA. The Gideon Society, recognized for spreading the Word of God through the placement of Bibles in hospitality rooms worldwide, was organized in this building by a group of young Christian men on July 1st, 1899. The building at 15 North High was originally the Argue Flats, a three-story apartment building. The attractive red brick building features a simple but classically inspired metal cornice. The Queen Anne-style First Presbyterian Church at 17 North Jackson Street was constructed of red brick on a rough limestone foundation. It has an irregular plan and is decorated elaborately with wood trim, primarily in the gables. The bell tower and the rounded windows suggest the Romanesque style, although the arched windows are paladin-like, suggesting the classicism of the Queen Anne style.
Next door at 15 North Jackson is the Whaley Overton Funeral Home. The Georgian Revival building of red brick was constructed in 1922. Although not particularly notable for their individual architectural treatment, the buildings on the north side of the 200 block of West Milwaukee Street present an excellent streetscape. Among the variety of specialty stores and businesses on this block was the hide and leather business operated at 222 West Milwaukee Street between 1876 and 1911 by Josiah Wright, who constructed the building in 1875. Its successor, the Janesville Hide and Leather Company, was in operation until the mid-1930s.
A simple two-story cream brick building that is slightly taller than its neighbors, it has little trim except for oriels on the front and side walls, which were probably added later. The commercial building at 220 West Milwaukee Street, constructed in 1879, is also a two-story cream brick block with a brick corbelled cornice. The windows are heavily decorated with shouldered brick arches. Of particular note is the Carroll Block at 218 West Milwaukee Street, built in 1876. It has retained its historic storefront with large display windows, pilasters, and an entry door with a glazed transom. The commercial building at 216 West Milwaukee Street, built in 1879, has a brick corbelled cornice and segmentally arched windows on the second floor. The Connors building at 214 West Milwaukee Street differs from the others in that it is of red brick construction and wasn't erected until 1920. It has details that suggest the 20th century commercial style. Instead of a cornice, the front wall rises to a parapet that suggests battlements. The windows are decorated with flat arches and stone sills. The first floor has art modern metal panels and small windows. The north side of the intersection of Franklin and West Milwaukee Streets was a focal point of West Side business activity. Today it remains only as a small corner park dedicated to World War I with a Doughboy Memorial.
The Corn Exchange Block, no longer in existence, was built in 1855. Its distinctive curved facade was oriented toward a large cast iron fountain that rested in a small triangle on Franklin Street. The ground floors of the exchange were occupied by a variety of stores, and the upper floors housed lawyers and physicians. Nearby, in a small frame building, Rock County dealers of grain, wool, and produce met to buy and sell their goods. By 1880, over 10% of the city's population was involved in manufacturing of one type or another. A grand example of the industrial expansion of this period was the new mill constructed by Janesville Cotton Manufacturing Company in 1874, which employed 400 people, 2/3 of which were women.
Constructed on the Upper Race south of the Upper Dam at 220 North Franklin Street, this impressive three-story building was renovated in 1985 into apartments and townhouses, retaining its distinctive Italianate style.
Our look at the major historic buildings in downtown Janesville concludes just 2 blocks north and across the river from Henry James's cabin. Most of the buildings in this video were constructed in a little more than a half a century after Janes made the original city plat. All of Janesville's historic downtown commercial buildings are significant because they were at the center of the city's 100-year commercial growth. Modern gaps in the historic streetscapes of this city's downtown have divided the commercial district into 4 distinct areas: the North Main Street Historic District, the South Main Street Historic District, the East Milwaukee Street Historic District, and the West Milwaukee Street Historic District. These historic districts are listed in the National Register of Historic Places, in part because their buildings are associated with the city's historic retail activity between 1850 and 1950. Janesville's downtown commercial district is filled with the city's finest historic commercial architecture, buildings that reflect the growth and development of commerce in the city during the 19th and 20th centuries. While much of the downtown's historic retail activity has moved to the outskirts of the city since World War II, the downtown still remains an important center of commercial activity, especially for banking, legal, and professional services. The renovation of several historic downtown commercial buildings, including the Lappin Hayes Block, the Fredendall Block, and the Janesville Pumping Station, illustrates how old buildings can be adaptively reused for modern commercial purposes while maintaining their historic features. As more downtown buildings are adaptively reused or renovated, the downtown will remain a vital component in the city's economy while reflecting the city's most important commercial past.